We're going to go back to our study in Revelation. We're going to be in chapter 21 this evening. We've been in a series that I entitled The Church, or What Happens to the Church After the Rapture. And we've been through a whole lot of different events that are recorded in the New Testament, specifically in the prophetic book of Revelation. The only prophecy book really in the New Testament is the book of Revelation, though there's other things mentioned in some of the other books, but the purpose of Revelation is that it be prophetic. And one of the most difficult books probably for us to understand, definitely the most difficult New Testament book to interpret and understand, but yet so many things told to us that are going to be events that we will face in the days ahead, in the future. And a lot of things there. We started with the rapture of the church, God taking his church out of this world, Jesus coming in the clouds, taking his church out of this world. The dead in Christ will rise first, then we which are alive and remain will be called up to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. 1 Thessalonians tells us we're going to meet the Lord in the air. He's going to take the church out of this world. And then once the church is removed, there will be a time of great judgment on the earth. And we talked about that in a little bit of detail. The time of tribulation. We didn't talk about it a lot, though, because that is not something that has to do with the church after the rapture, because the church has no part in the tribulation, I believe. The church is completely gone away from the world during those days. It is a time when God pours out his judgment, pictured through the three different scenes presented in the book of Revelation. And then after that takes place, Christ then with his church returns to the earth. That's what we know is the second coming of Christ. He comes down to the earth and establishes his kingdom. He rules from Jerusalem. And during that 1,000 years of his kingdom established on this earth, the saints will rule with him. We learn as we study the scriptures. We also know that the Jews, during the time of tribulation, will come to Christ as a nation. Not as necessarily all individuals per se, but as a nation. The Jewish nation will acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah. At his second coming, they missed the first coming of Christ. At his second coming, they will have acknowledged him. And during that 1,000 years, Satan's bound. He's put into the bottomless pit and chained there. And Christ rules on the earth 1,000 years. Those who are alive at the beginning of that 1,000 years are given long life during the days of the millennial reign of Christ, and they repopulate the earth. The Bible tells us, and we see a scene where there are many, many children born during that time. You liken it unto the time in the Old Testament before the flood, when men lived to be, almost 1,000 years old, 500 years old. I believe Noah was 600 years old, I believe, when the flood began. So when men lived to be hundreds instead of 100 years old, they lived to be hundreds of years old and had many children, way more than what we would even see as feasible in our day. And that's going to be the time that's going to come to the earth again. During that 1,000 years, people will have children. They will repopulate the earth again. And then the Bible says Satan's released at the end of that 1,000 years to go in to deceive those that are on the earth, deceiving those who have followed in the footsteps of those who were alive as that time began, those who are born during those days. He will deceive them. He will gather them together, and then there's that last conflict, and we mentioned that last week and talked about that some, that last battle that takes place on the earth. And at the end of that battle, the Bible gives us a picture of God destroying that army, and then Satan, the false prophet and the Antichrist, have already been removed from the world and placed in the lake of fire. We studied that a few weeks ago. And now finally Satan is removed from the world and placed into the lake of fire, which is his final abode. That's where he will be forever. And given us, by the way, and I stop and mention this every now and then, because if you read, some of you may read things about end times. One of the things that clearly, at least in my mind, makes a distinction between these events is when Christ, during the Battle of Armageddon, the Bible tells us that the Antichrist and the false prophet are bound and they are thrown into the lake of fire. But yet Satan is bound in that bottomless pit, And then later on, 1,000 years later, we see Satan released for a short time, and then he's cast in the lake of fire, giving us the picture. Though there's many things I don't understand about all of it, because I don't know if anybody can completely understand it, except for Johnny Clyde Sexton, that is. They can completely understand it. But here's what we see. Two different events, two different battles, two different results of the battles taking place as you study the end times, making it a clear, at least in my mind, making it a clear picture of two events, and then 1,000 years separating those two events. After Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, last week we talked about the great white throne of judgment, where God deals with those that have died and left this world without Jesus Christ. That is the final judgment for those who are lost. They will give an account. Everybody will give an account. Christians will give an account at the judgment seat of Christ. Thankfully, our works are judged based upon reward or merit and not based upon our guilt before God. Christ has established that we are not guilty before God because we've put our faith in Christ. But for a lost man, he's guilty before God, and he will be judged based upon his works as well, but not for reward, for punishment. A lost man's works will be judged, each one. We described that last week. And they will be punished accordingly. And judgment will be based upon a man's life and his works. And we spent a lot of time last week on that subject matter. Based upon his life and his works, what he did in this life. And if you remember, those who would be most guilty and those who would receive the greatest judgment and condemnation would be those who knew the most about the gospel. And that's where we spent quite a while last week. Those who knew the most about the gospel, those who knew the gospel, they heard Christ preach to them. They heard it presented to them, just like this morning, where it was laid out clearly. God dealt with them. God called them. He pulled them. He drew at their heartstrings, however we would call it, and they refused. Those individuals, when they leave this world without Christ, will receive a far greater condemnation than those who maybe lived somewhere and never even heard of Christ, had no idea who he was. They're still lost, because we're born lost. We don't become lost. We're born lost. But they will still be lost, but yet they never heard the name of Christ. So their judgment will be a little different than the judgment for that one who sat in Sunday school as a child, and then sat in teen church as a teenager, and then sat in adult church, and they just never received the gospel of Jesus Christ. They have the greatest condemnation. And then afterwards we were talking, Brother Austin and I, and probably even the greatest condemnation is to those who intentionally led others astray, and that would be your false teachers, those who knowingly did so. And I just wonder sometimes, I've talked to people a lot this week about the Catholic Church, and I just wonder how many of those involved, the priest and different ones, I wonder how many of those really know that they are teaching a false doctrine and a false gospel. And I don't know, I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea. But there will be a great judgment for the individuals who taught people of a gospel other than the true gospel of Jesus Christ. There will be a judgment unlike any other. And we didn't get into that last week. Matter of fact, I didn't even think of it until afterwards, but I believe that's true. So all judgment is not equal, just like all rewards are not equal. They're based upon works, and a person's works will be judged. That's scary. That's very scary in some ways, in many ways, I guess. That people we know, people that you and I know, who will stand there one day and be held accountable for their life. Be a fearful thing. Jonathan said it right when he preached that sermon. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And he was right, because it is a very fearful thing. And anyway, once that judgment's over, begin to read in Revelation of a time when everything of the past is eradicated and all things are made new. And that's where we're going to pick up tonight. He makes all things new. And the reason he makes all things new, I believe, is because everything in this life that we know of is tainted. Everything that we know is cursed. As beautiful as it might be, sometimes in our house, out of our bedroom window, you can look down a little path that goes all the way down to the creek. It used to be a logging road. And in the morning, sometimes there'll be a little bit of a fog in the air. And when the sun's coming up through the trees, it is like the most beautiful scene ever, looking down that little path in the morning out of our bedroom window. But as beautiful as things can be in this world that we see, all of those things are corrupted by judgment and sin. None of them are like God actually made them and intended for them to be. And that's hard to understand because there are some beautiful, miraculous things that we look at in this life and in this world and see, and we just ponder them, and it invokes wonder into our hearts when we see them. But yet all of these things that we see and know are a part of the curse. They've all been cursed. And none of them are like Christ made them originally. So just imagine the most beautiful scenery in the mountains, or if you're a beach person, or if you're a hunting person, whatever, the most beautiful, or if you like sitting on the lake in a boat, not catching any fish, whatever. Whatever it is that's beautiful to you, just imagine what it would be like if it was like God made it in the beginning. Just imagine what that would be like. So everything has to be made new, and that's what we learn when we begin to look at this last part of the book of Revelation, of the revelation of John the Apostle. This last part just begins to present to us this act of God in making all things new. In Revelation 21, I want to read here, and then I'm going to read from a few other passages in the next few moments. But Revelation 21, it says in verse 1, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John," verse 2, "saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." We'll talk about that more in just a moment. Verse 3, "And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said unto me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. And he that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." Here in Revelation 21, we are introduced to this scene, this final scene from John, that describes for us what Christ will do after all of these other events have taken place. We study this tonight in our study of the Church After the Rapture, because we are a part of all of these scenes. We are a part of this. We get to be there, present in this event. He describes for us, in verse 2, he says, "I saw a holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Once all these things are made new, then we find a city that is a part of our eternal heavenly kingdom as well. And we're going to talk about those things. But before we even get there, let's back up a moment and talk about all things being made new. What does he mean by that? You remember at the great white throne of judgment, the Bible said that everything fled away from the face of him that sat upon the throne. After that final judgment, the Bible tells us that Christ is going to make all things new. But that's not the whole picture. Let's go to a couple other passages, because I believe it will help even further shed light on this. 2 Peter 3, and I won't turn there. You can if you want. You don't have to. 2 Peter 3, I have the verse already typed out before me. It says, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Verse 10, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for the new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. Here is in the book of 2 Peter, as he writes, he is also given some revelation from God that is going to tell us what it is talking about when it says Jesus is going to make all things new. Well, Peter is going to tell us what it is that's going to happen. He describes for us here a time in the future when, and we know now it's after this millennial reign of Christ, it's after this final conflict, it's after this great white throne of judgment. When all of those things have taken place, Peter describes for us what happens to the present heaven, that's the atmosphere, and the present earth, the place on which we live. He describes for us exactly what takes place. Remember, this place is cursed by sin. The curse that God placed on Adam and Eve when they were in the garden after their sin, God cursed the ground. You remember, for Adam's sake, he cursed the ground. And ever since that time, this world as a whole has been cursed. Well, Peter describes for us in that last day, he describes for us what's going to happen to the earth and also to the atmosphere around the earth in that final time. It says it's going to, and here's the words Peter uses, it's going to melt with a fervent heat. Melt with a fervent heat. The words there, if you look it up into the Greek writers and the things that they understand going on here, they say that references a hissing or crackling sound. One of the writers I read after this week said that most likely is a description of a time when there's some type of an atomic reaction taking place where the atoms are actually splitting apart, and the things that are going to happen in that day are going to be unlike anything that we've ever seen or known in this life. And literally, the Bible tells us that He is going to melt away or burn away everything that we know right now. Everything that we see, as beautiful as you think that mountain scene is, or as beautiful as you think that the ocean is, all of those things are going to be burned up. They're going to be melted away with this fervent heat that's described here by Peter, and it's going to be done away with. Now, let's talk about this for a second, because there's a little bit of disagreement in interpreters, and nobody knows for certain which one's right or if anyone's right. But there's a lot of interpreters, because of the words used when Peter's describing this, there's a lot of interpreters who believe the description there is that the atmosphere and the outer parts of the earth are going to burn up, and the inner parts of the earth are going to remain, and God's going to make new out of the old. Some believe that's the case just because of the Greek words used. The word for new is kainos, which refers to the state of freshness rather than the Greek word neos, which means new in terms of age. When it's being described here, some say that the idea is not that God's going to completely destroy everything, but He's only going to burn up the outside that has been tainted by sin, and He's going to remake it. But either way, whether that's the case or if He just destroys it altogether, one of the writers I read after a lot this week believes it's all going to completely be destroyed and God's going to make it all new, which is what Revelation says, it's made new, but it's not clarified because of what Peter says, whether it's just the outer or this thing entire. And that's probably more than you even need to know, but I would just tell you that is a kind of an ongoing debate even today between writers as to which one is correct. But either way, these things are melted away. They burn, he says, with a fervent heat. And once that takes place, then we see in Revelation 21:1 this new heaven and this new earth being presented before before John's eyes in the book of Revelation, as he's allowed now to see that which God has made and made new, afresh and anew. Heaven and earth, and this is important to know, heaven and earth, and when we say heaven, we're talking about the atmosphere. Earth, obviously, is the planet. Both of those are present in eternity, okay? That's important to know because we don't always, again, the movies have messed our theology up a lot, okay? Heaven and earth are both present in eternity. We still live on the earth, and we dwell on the earth, and the atmosphere is still here. It's made differently, and we'll talk about that in a moment maybe. I believe it's made differently. It's made like it was originally. Let's say it that way. It's made like it was originally, but nonetheless, we will dwell on earth during that time. We may not live on earth but we will dwell on earth during that time. The planet Earth still exists, so global warming didn't get us. Amen. Well, there is going to be a global warming, but it's the last global warming long after we're all gone out of this world anyway. There is a global warming, but it's not going to happen while Ocasio-Cortez is in the Congress. It's not going to happen then. It's going to be later on. So we don't have to worry about global warming destroying us because we won't be here when that takes place. But the globe is going to warm up significantly with a fervent heat, and it's going to melt. But it's not in our lifetime on this earth. However, we do live on earth, and we do still have the atmosphere. And all these things that we know now, only recreated in their perfect form. What will they look like? I don't know for certain the answer to that, but I can tell you what I think is the answer. I think they're going to look like they did when God made them the first time, in their perfect form. When there was no curse, there was no sin, there was no air pollution, there was no any of that stuff. I've been to Haiti many times. I don't even know how many times I went to Haiti over the years for doing missions work and different things. And if you've ever been there, then you'll remember it forever. If you've never been there, you couldn't really imagine it, by the way, unless you were there. But when you get to the city of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where the airport is, you land. And obviously, as you're coming in for a landing, you're out. It's not even very far from Florida. You're just right across. You could boat there. You could get in a boat and go there. As you're coming in for a landing, you're looking at all this beautiful ocean water and everything, and it's just it's majestic almost. But then as you get closer and closer and closer to that little island into the ground, you begin to see what looks like disaster. It looks like what happened here. And once you get in Haiti and begin to go out into the city, it's just the worst thing imaginable. We wouldn't even begin to understand what it's like to be there, and we wouldn't even be able to fathom what it's like to live there as a Haitian, as those people live. It's unbelievable. But one of the things that stands out to me is how destructive man can be to a place, to God's creation. It is the nastiest, most filthy, most marred place that I have ever seen in my life. And I've been to a lot of different places. Nothing even comes close. Years ago, there's mountains all around the city area. There's a lot of mountains on that island. And they have cut every tree off of the mountains within miles of the city. There's no trees. They cut them all, and they didn't plant any back. By the way, nothing wrong with cutting a tree, but we do have to be mindful of what we're doing. They've cut them all, and they've used it for whatever they did with it, and now it's just dirt, and the dirt washes like crazy now because they haven't done anything to prevent erosion. It is just literally a disaster. It is a disaster. And everything that they've touched is like what I just described to you. It's nasty, filthy, unsanitary. It's awful. Even those crystal blue waters, when you get away from Port-au-Prince on the island and go into the island, we drove about, I want to say 8 or 10 hours into the island, inward towards land, to get to a mission station of a lady that's no longer living, but she was there for like 60 years, I.C. May Fredericks. And we went to her compound that they had built, had a school, a little medical thing, and it had a church. And we went to her, and way out away from the city, there was trees. It was just a beautiful place, like a tropic place. And you went out to the ocean, and the water was just so crystal clear and blue. I'd never seen that before because I'd never been to that type. All the oceans I knew about were like either Panama City, Florida, or the few times I've been to the beach in North Carolina. That's the only island. That's the only ocean that I know anything about. But this is like Caribbean looking, like blue. It's just beautiful. But yet when you go to that city, and even the ocean is polluted all around the city. You go to the water's edge around the Port-au-Prince, Haiti area where all the people live. Everything's polluted. Everything's nasty. Nothing looks like it did on this earth now. Nothing looks like it did when God originally created it. Nothing does. Man's fingerprint is on all of it, and we've marred it all, and sin has marred it all. And God has cursed it all. And we got to remember that. God has cursed this world. But when he first made it, it was not that way. When God created the earth originally, he said it was good. Everything he did, it was good. The trees were good. The plant life was good. The animal life was good. Even the life under the water, all of those things were pronounced as good, and man was pronounced as good as well. Everything was good that God created. He is going to make the heaven, the atmosphere, and the earth, the planet. He's going to make them like he did, I believe, in the beginning, where all of these things, before all these things had marred them. That's going to be the place that we're going to have here at that time. Now, Peter has a couple things he says, and I won't get into a sermon here, though you easily could. He asks this question. He said, because this is true, and because there is going to be this fervent heat, and all of these things are going to melt away, he asked this question. He said, what manner of people should we be if that's the case? In other words, how should we live? What should we live for? What should be important to us as Christians if we know that all of these things are going to melt away, they're going to burn up? Then how shall we live if that's true? That's an interesting question that Peter throws into the mix of all of those things he's telling us that are going to happen in the future. That's a good question. How should we live? Let's talk about that for a moment. If that's true and all those things are going to happen as he says, how should we live? What do you think? Anybody? Okay. The only thing you're going to be able to take with you from here is people, right? That's the only thing you get to take from here is people, so we need to be busy trying to reach people for Christ. All right, what else? What else? How should we live if that's true? Knowing these things, how then shall we live? Yeah. Yeah. So very good. That's exactly what I was fishing for as well. We can't be consumed with the physical here on this earth because it's all going to burn up. Okay, that's ultimately what Peter's point is, I think. So how do we figure out the balance? Because the devil hates balance. Howard Bass said that to me one day, and I've always remembered it. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I remember him saying that. The devil hates balance. How do we balance this life then? Because God, for instance, my wife is a nester. Anybody know what a nester is? Anybody know what it is? She makes nests. She gets in her little house and she makes her nest, like most women do probably. And she's a nester. And God put that in her. Thank the Lord that God made mamas that way, because if it was daddies, it'd all be practical, you know. We wouldn't even have furniture except for one recliner, right? A camouflage recliner and a side table to put your sweet tea on. That's all you would have, right? God put that in them. So we have to find the balance, and it is a delicate balance sometimes, I think, and I'm sure we overstep the boundaries of that balance. But we have to find the balance in living in a world and enjoying this world and doing things with this world, and yet at the same time maintaining this truth that Peter lays out before us, knowing that all these things are going to pass away. What manner of men should we be? Keeping the balance there. It's a hard balance to find sometimes. Any thoughts about that? Because God made us, I'm confident that God made my wife a nester. And I don't know if nester's the right word. That's what I use. I don't know what word would be correct. God made her that way. So I think God intends for a mama to do that wherever she is. If we are in some foreign country and we live in a grass hut, you still got a nester there, and she's still going to nest, you know, whatever that means in a grass hut in a foreign country. So we have to find a balance, and we do have to find a balance. But I think the thrust of Peter's message and the point of it is that we need to realize that all of these things are passing away. And we need to look at all of them as if they're passing away. Stop keeping all your junk like it's going to last forever. Stop acting as if you're going to take money or anything else from this life with you when you leave and go into eternity, because you're not taking any of it with you. None of it's going to go. That storage container that you've been paying for 40 years with all that junk in it that you hadn't seen in 20 years, that stuff's not going with you. You're going to leave it here. And all that stuff you got in your attic and all that stuff you got out behind the house in that shed, that stuff's not going with you. It's not going with you. One day when you leave this world, people are going to have a yard sale, and they're going to get rid of all of it, right? That's what's going to happen to it. It's not going with you. So Peter reminds us here to figure out how to strike the balance. because these things are all passing away, and they all will burn up. And that's not to say we can't enjoy life. That's not to say that you can't be a nester. I think God put that in a lady, in most ladies anyway, to be a nester. But at the same time, you can't be consumed with these things because they will pass away. They're all going to pass away. And none of them will we take with us. And just in case you were wondering, you can't leave any of it back, so when you come back with Jesus one day that it'll still be here. It's not going to happen that way either, okay? It's all going to burn up and melt away. Any thoughts about that? Yes, ma'am, Miss Beverly. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Not to put too much importance on them, for sure. Uh, because when we get it mixed up, when we get it out of balance, it can become sin. Anything. I mean, you may collect, I don't think anybody does, so I'll use this as an example. You might collect porcelain dolls, or you might collect trains, or you might collect stamps, or whatever it is, whatever it is that you collect. Um, and there's nothing wrong with having those things, but if those things get to the wrong place in your heart, in your mind, then they become sin, and anything can. Even a gun collection, I think of something. I thought all that stuff might be stuff the ladies would keep. So you might have guns, and you might have a collection of guns, and nothing wrong with that. You might need them one day. You never know, right? But if those things come to the wrong place in your heart and mind, then they become sinful, and they do. So Peter says, live as though all these things are going to burn up. We have to remember that always. It will all burn up. Balance is the key there. And striking that balance and staying within the parameters of that balance. And we have to, as Christians, figure out, okay, what is balance concerning all these things? What is the right place to be? Because I know somebody with an attitude say, y'all don't need none of that stuff. Well, they might need some of it. And you know what I mean? And God made us so that we enjoy certain things. He wants us to enjoy His creation. I believe that's true. And then the other person said, I need all of this stuff. You've watched those shows. There was a lady in North Carolina. Usually, I think the Hoarders show lasts about 20 minutes per person or something like that. But they made a whole hour out of this one lady from North Carolina. She lived down, was it in Greensboro? Where was it at? Greensboro, North Carolina. She lived in some mansion there. Her husband had passed away or something. And she had filled a whole mansion full of junk. She didn't want to move any of it. She didn't want to lose any of it. She wanted to keep everything. Well, somewhere there's a balance in the midst of all of that, and we have to find that balance. So we are to live, Peter says, with the knowledge that all this stuff is passing away. All of it is. The only thing you can take to heaven with you is people. People. You can store up treasures in heaven, but you can only take people to heaven. Think about that. You can only take people to heaven. Yes, sir, Brad? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can't let the blessing take the place of the blesser. We have to be very careful there. Mr. Don. living for the now and the stuff in this world instead of living for God and keeping in mind the afterlife, the world that is to come, for sure. Were you going to say something? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be able to use things for God's purposes and not just upon ourselves. Yeah. Any other thoughts there? Yes, ma'am. The Nestor over here has a word for us. No. Go ahead. I can expound upon it. Yeah, don't live, don't act like around your kids that nothing. Don't act as if we can't do anything as people, as God's people, and can't enjoy anything. My brother, I think, is the one who said this. He said he stopped telling his kids they couldn't afford something because that wasn't true. They could afford it. He said, I started telling my kids we choose to use our money differently uh, because he didn't want them to grow up thinking, man, if you're in the ministry and you're in a pastor's family, you can't have nothing. Well, no, it's not that you can't have nothing. It's just we have chosen to do differently with what we have. And I think that spoke volumes to me when he said that, because I had been guilty of saying, we can't afford that. Well, we actually can afford it if we want to. I can go buy a brand new truck today if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I'd rather do something else with the money that God gives me. So, um, so we have to be careful with our children not to cause them to resent the kingdom work. And I know someone who did. I've met their children, and I've talked to some of them, and they talked about how awful it was growing up, that they were not even allowed to enjoy some of the things that we would think are just givens, as Americans. They didn't even get to enjoy some of those things, and it was simply because their dad's answer was always, no, we're not going to spend any money on this. Well, I don't think that needs to be that way. Again, the devil hates balance. He hates balance. And he tries to keep us off balance all the time. We have to find the balance in things and be wise and be good stewards of what God's given us. And stewardship is you using everything, including your life, that God's given you for his purposes, whatever that may be. Using it for his purposes. That is what our goal is supposed to be in this life. Anybody else, before I cruise on, I want to make sure I don't leave anybody hanging, for sure. Those things are stuff we need to remember and think about. So we got there from Peter saying, all these things, what manner of people should you be? Because all these things are going to pass away. They're going to melt with a fervent heat. So how should you live your life knowing that that's true? And the answer, the simple answer is, we live our lives for that which is not going to pass away, is the answer. Living for that which will not pass away. And we have to discern in our own hearts as believers in Christ, as Christians, we have to discern what are those things that don't pass away. Because I don't want to spend all of my life building a kingdom here that's going to burn one day. Boy, that would be discouraging, wouldn't it? That'd be discouraging. So we have to keep balance. But also I don't want my kids to grow up and say, man, we never got to go to McDonald's ever. My dad was so tight, I don't want them to feel that way either. So somewhere there's a balance. And sometimes we splurge and go to McDonald's, I'll confess. I don't want my kids to grow up feeling as though we could never enjoy anything in this life, but I don't want to spend all of my life just enjoying the things of this world either. Finding balance is the key. The devil hates balance. God wants us to be balanced people. We have to find the balance. Now, back to our subject matter now. A new heaven and a new earth, where God has remade this earth and the atmosphere around it, I believe, back to its pre-fall status. I think that's what he does. I think he makes it like he did the first time, but this time it's going to stay that way, thank God. It's not going to change. It's going to be like the Garden of Eden. Whatever that was, it'll be like the Garden of Eden again. And we will have the opportunity to dwell upon the earth forever. I know the Jehovah's Witnesses have some funny business they do in their interpretation of Scripture, because they do believe there is a heaven and earth still afterwards, and there is still an atmosphere in earth afterwards. But they just have some hokey pokeys they do to get all of their theology built around it. But there is a heaven and earth. It's still here. It's remade new, and it's here. And we will dwell on earth forever. We will get the opportunity to come and enjoy this creation of God in its original state. And by the way, just so you know, I can go on, I'm going to step out on a limb. The scientists are not going to find, or the astronomers or whoever, they're not going to find some more planets somewhere that's got people on them. Just so you know. I know y'all were wondering about that. There aren't any other planets with people on them out there anywhere. Now, I don't know what is out there as far as how many, who knows what God made when he made this. But he has said nothing whatsoever in his word about there being other people. It's only us. We are his special people that he created. And we will get to live here in eternity. It won't be like it is now, but we will get to live on the earth in eternity. And remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, men are going to be allowed by God in eternity to utilize their giftedness and their wisdom and their minds. And we're going to get to enjoy life. It's not going to be clouds floating around with harps. It's going to be us getting to enjoy God's creation like he intended. And what did Adam and Eve do before the fall? Adam was doing what? You remember? He was out there taking care of the animals. He was taking care of the garden. He was tilling the earth. He was doing all those things pre-fall, just so you know. If that's the case, then, and he remakes it like it was then, I believe that'll be the case in the future. We will be able to enjoy the earth, and we'll be able to live on the earth and utilize the earth. Keep that in mind. Not clouds. No, I wouldn't look good in a white robe. I'm bald-headed. You know, I might have a head full of hair in heaven, though. I don't know what's going to happen there. And y'all all might be bald, and I'll have hair. How would that be, you know? No. No clouds. Nobody floating around on the cloud. No harps. But we will dwell on the earth. Now, the earth is not our home, though. And now let's move to this next little part here, this mentioned in this passage. The earth is not our own because, verse 2 of Revelation 21, I saw a holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. The picture here is that there is another part of eternity that is not the earth nor the atmosphere around the earth. There's another part. This is actually the home of the saints, of the people who are saved down through history, all the way back to Adam and Eve and everybody that'll live before the world ends. All the saved people will live in this city. They're going to live in Jerusalem, but it's the New Jerusalem. That'll be our home. That'll be where we live. Now you think, well, I mean, there could be billions of people. I don't know how many people have been saved down through history. I have no idea. It could be billions of people. And you're thinking, how could all those people live in one city? Because, I mean, I feel closed in Raleigh sometimes, you know. It's like, man, it's like, you know, they're building houses over here, they're building houses over here, and y'all creeping in on my territory, you know. Y'all can run all the deer out of Durham and Wake County if you're not careful, right? How could all those people live in one city? And here's the answer. The Bible actually gives us a description of this city and lays out for us exactly, and I'm trying to find in my notes where I have it at, lays out for us exactly what that city looks like. I know where I wrote it. Pardon me for a second. Let me get back over here. My notes are not well organized, and I apologize. In Revelation chapter number 21, it says in verse, let me skip down to where I have to go. Let me just start in verse 9. It says, then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. He's talking about the New Jerusalem. And he carried me away in the Spirit into the great and high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like the most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. And also she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates and the names written on them. And he goes and describes all these things. But here's where I wanted to get to. Let me skip down a little. Verse 15. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. And the city is laid out as a square. It's a cube. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. So in other words, it's a perfect cube. The length, the width, and the height are all the same measurement. So the question we've got to ponder now is, what is 12,000, let me find my word again, 12,000 furlongs? Well, you go in your study Bible, so you don't have to go figure that out on your own. You go in your study Bible and you figure out that 12,000 furlongs is about 1,400 miles. 1,400 miles. Now let's think about that. Somebody Google this for me real quick while I'm talking, and you can answer in a moment. How far is it from North Carolina to California? Figure that out while I'm talking, all right? Look that up. Do you know? 3,000 miles? Is that right? Okay. So he says here that these 1,200 furlongs are 1,400 miles. So about half the distance from North Carolina to California, wide, half the distance from North Carolina to California deep, and then that same distance high. It's a perfect cube. So 1,400 miles by 1,400 miles by 1,400 miles. That's the measurement John gives us here of this New Jerusalem, this heavenly city as it's called. Now, that's massive. You know, that's huge. Just, I can't even imagine something that tall. I mean, when you go to New York and see like 40-story buildings or whatever, you're like, wow, you know, you sit there in amazement when you see those things. They're building a new one in Raleigh. What is it going to be, like 40 stories? Is that right? The new building, anybody know? They passed all of the stuff recently for a new complex they're building somewhere. And I want to say, is 40 right or is it 20? Y'all don't know? Do y'all not read the news? Oh, I told y'all not to read the news, didn't I? Yeah, I did. I told you not to. I forgot. Yeah. But 1,400 miles high. This New Jerusalem, the Bible tells us here, comes down from God. It descends down from God towards the earth. It never says that that city is going to rest upon the earth. A lot of people have a lot of different ideas as to where exactly they place it at. Dr. Barnes taught me in one of the classes I took with him his picture of what this was, and he said he felt like it hovered somewhere in the sky, in the atmosphere of the earth, but not on the earth. And he believed that we could, teleport back and forth, because we're going to be able to do what Jesus could do in his new body, so we could do the same. We're going to be able to go back and forth. But that's going to be our home. The New Jerusalem, this perfect square city, 1,400, will be our home. That's where we'll live. When Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions, some people interpret that word as room, whatever you interpret it as, that's where this is. That's the place that Christ went to prepare for us. That's where he's been working on. That's what he's been working on all of this time, is this place called the New Jerusalem. And that'll be where we live forever in eternity. The church, the Old Testament saints, and then the tribulation saints will all live in that place for eternity. And it's going to be a bunch of us. It's going to be a big place, and hopefully they got elevators, right? I mean, we struggle with like 3 floors without, no. It's going to be a marvelous place. Unbelievable. We will live there in the presence of God. He's going to be the city. It's the sun, the source of light for the city. In the presence of God. And we will have the ability to go back and forth between there and earth, and this new heaven and new earth that God has made. And we will be able to enjoy the earth that God created all at the same time. That's what heaven's going to be like. Now, I don't know all the other details, but I do know those are the things that God tells us about here. And then he tells us what's not going to be there, and I won't go through all of that again because we've already talked about that, but no pain, no sorrow, no crying, all of those things are going to be removed from our lives, and no death. Those are going to be removed, and it'll be a place that's perfect, like unto the Eden, the original creation that God made, and we will be able to dwell in the presence of God forever in that place. A question was asked maybe last week, maybe the week before. Miss Andrea, I believe you're the one that asked this question. And I didn't know the answer to it. I told you what I thought, but I actually found something else this week studying that I thought, hey, I need to talk about that for a little bit. The question was, how can we be happy in heaven if we know that there's people that are not there with us? How can we be happy? And I don't know that this completely answers that question, but I ran across this where somebody wrote on it somewhat, and I wanted to read you what it says. In Isaiah 65, verse 17, he says this, "For behold, I create new heavens and new earth, and the former shall not be remembered nor come into mind." The former should not be remembered nor come into mind. The Hebrew there, one writer said, means come upon the heart. In other words, it will not be in our hearts that which was former. We will only be able to enjoy that which is present at that time, that new heaven and new earth. And that's maybe an answer for us that I didn't know before, that it will not be something that we will remember anymore. It won't be in our hearts the things of the past. We will only enjoy those things that are made new by God. Maybe that's an answer to the question that we were talking about. I guess it was last week. But a beautiful place God made just for us. A place where we will live, that new heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, and a place where we will be able to abide, or be a part, or live, or maybe I should say come and enjoy, and that'll be the earth with a new atmosphere. An earth made differently. It says there's no more sea, meaning that it's going to be different. What is it, 70 or 85%? Is 85% of the earth covered by water? I think that's right. 75, 85% of the earth is covered by water. There will be no more sea, so it's going to be different. And I'm not too sure in God's original creation that wasn't the case anyway. And during the flood and all of those times, I think things were changed significantly from what they were then to what they are now. All of those things will be different. It'll be a different place, a perfect place, which we know nothing about because we don't know perfection, but we will be able to live there forever, enjoying the earth, the atmosphere God made new, and enjoying that heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, that God has created for us to live in forever. A lot of things there, a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of stuff to think about there, but that's what God has promised to us, and that's what we are supposed to get excited about as Christians in this earth. We're to look forward to looking for a city. You know, we're supposed to look forward to that thing, that place, that day when we get to be there and we get to spend eternity in that perfect place in the presence of our God. That's what we have to look forward to. So what happens to the church after the rapture? All this stuff happens to the church after the rapture. And ultimately, we finally end up in the place that God said, I have promised you. Jesus said, I went to prepare for you, and we will get to be there forever with one another, with the saints, and also in the presence of God. Beautiful thing. So remember that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, but well, I said a while ago, I don't know the answer to that, but my Dr. Barnes, who knows a lot more than I do, he probably forgot this week more than I've ever known. But anyway, Dr. Barnes said that he thinks we will be able to move back and forth without any means. We'll be able to do it on our own. As Jesus passed through walls and things after his resurrection, he thinks our heavenly bodies will be such that we can do that. Now, that is his assumption because he don't know that, but that would make sense. Or maybe somebody like Steve just going to create something awesome like off Star Wars or something. We'll be able to fly around on, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to happen, but we do know it does happen because we know that there's a city clearly described here for us, and we know there's a new heaven and earth as well. So there's two different things that are described here, and both of them are presented here in this passage as the place where we will get to spend eternity. So both are in play here in this passage of Scripture. But how we get from one to the other, I really don't know. He felt like it was teleporting type stuff. I don't know if that's true or not. That's a good question. So why would we, Miss Joanna's asking, why would we even want to be in both places? If you're in heaven, the heavenly city, why would you want to go there? I think the answer to that is is because the earth in its original form is so magnificent and so glorifying to God that a part of heaven will be enjoying that which God made. We've enjoyed it. We've enjoyed it in this life, but we've only enjoyed it in its fallen state. We will then be able to enjoy it in its pure state and in its original form, and it'll be something that we will be. It'll be a part of heaven. It'll be a part of heaven. That's the best answer. It'll be a part of heaven, and the enjoyment of those things that God has made for us will be part of the enjoyment that we will experience in heaven. Best answer I can give anyway. I believe that's correct. God has made it new, and He's presented it to us so that we can enjoy it and be able to dwell there for eternity. I think that's the answer for sure. Any other thoughts about that? Yes, ma'am. Very good question. So, in order to answer that question, Miss Andre's question was, if people pass away now, will that place where they are now cease to be? That's a good question. So, in order to answer that question, now we got to say, where are people who pass away now? Where did they go? Because we say they went to heaven, but where is heaven? What do we mean by that? Is it this New Jerusalem, heavenly city that comes down from heaven? Is that where they are right now? I tend to feel like that's the case. I'm going to defer, and Austin's probably going to say, don't ask me that question. What's your thought, Austin? Mhm. Mhm. That's not a good answer. No, I'm just kidding. We do, we really don't know exactly where. In the book of Luke, when the rich man died um, and went to hell, and then Lazarus died and went to be in Abraham's bosom in a place called paradise. That is at that time what we understood to be uh, a place where it would be considered the presence of God. Now, you can get into all kind of different things that we won't go into at this point because there's no need to. Um, there's no question that they're in the presence of God, that's for sure. There's no doubt that that's true. There's no doubt that presently they are souls and not bodies. There's no doubt that that's true because the body is not united to the soul until later in the future, in our future. So we know that that's the case. So exactly where they are right now, Miss Andre, I was looking at you, but Miss Andre asked the question. I don't know for certain where they are. It seems the New Jerusalem, as is presented here, is the abode of God. That's where God is. If that's true, then I think it would be reasonable to say maybe that's where He is now. He's in that New Jerusalem wherever He is, has it now. That's his home. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know a good answer for you. Really, the only thing that we can speak of in trying to answer that question is go to, okay, what does the Bible say when somebody died? And really, Luke 16 is one of the few places where we even see that. And I don't know that that gives us the complete picture of present day now, New Testament day. I don't know that it does. So they're in the presence of God now, and God's presence will be in that city then. Whether that is the case now or not, I don't know. Austin made me doubt myself when he answered the question, so I don't know. No, I don't know. It didn't really say. It doesn't tell us. It didn't tell us. Good question, though. Miss Andre always thinks of a good question. I might come back and answer it next week if I think about it this week and then come up with an answer. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Austin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's many things we don't know what it means. Some people do speculate, but they're just speculating. We don't know what it all consists of and what it all is, but we do know both of these exist. You got a New Jerusalem city, 1,400 miles square, so we know that our cube, I guess. It's a massive place. I think that's where we live. That's my opinion. That's where we live. And then the earth is here for our pleasure and in its perfect form. So whatever that's worth to you, whatever that's worth to you. Any other thoughts? All right. Don't go to the gym for 5 minutes. Oh, you got a question? You don't want to be in Abraham's bosom? Okay. All right. Stephanie don't want to be in Abraham's bosom. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to turn that in Austin, too. I was kidding. A lot of people believe that it is because it does speak of in the Psalms down into the earth. It speaks of that. Whether that is to be taken as meaning that hell is located in the earth. People speculate on that too. I don't know that they know, though. They talk about drilling this hole in Russia. You remember the deepest hole that's ever been drilled in Russia, and all these stories about the noises they were hearing coming out of the hole and all that kind of stuff. We don't know. We don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. It would have to be somewhere out in God's creation somewhere. I don't know. Somewhere in God's creation. The sun, because it's hot. David thinks it's on the sun. I don't know. Do you have a thought there? Mm-hmm. Not being in the earth because the earth is destroyed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also don't know either. Mm-hmm. And then even in the midst of that argument, a lot of guys say the wording used is that he only burns the outside of the earth and not the whole. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. Um, I don't know. Just to be honest, I don't say that often because normally I act like I know even if I don't, but I really don't know the answer to that question. So, good deal. Something for y'all to think about this week. Remember, though, those two places. That's the theme of this passage in Revelation 21. It's new heaven, new earth, and then the holy city, the new Jerusalem. All of them are new. Notice the new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem. And they're all created by God for his saints, for his people. And that is the place where we're going to be forever. No cloud floating around, none of that. Don't even think that. That's movies. It's movie stuff. But truly enjoying God's creation that he's made specifically for us. Think on that. I'm glad you were with us tonight. If you get some great thoughts this week, come back and let me know, and we'll talk about it next time. And otherwise, I hope you have a great week. Pray for our nation this week. Important time for us. And if you haven't already voted, I hope you have. But if you haven't, you only have Tuesday now. It's your only other opportunity to do so. And get there early so you don't have to wait too long maybe. And make sure you do. Get there in front so the people behind that may not have the stick-to-itiveness may get discouraged and go home. No, I'm just kidding. Make sure you go vote, all right, if you hadn't done so. God bless you. Have a great night. We'll see you again soon.